Good evening, Columbus community. This is Board President Adair, and I am here to call the special board meeting retreat to order for May 12th, 2020. Mr. Treasurer, will you please call the roll?
President Adair.
Present.
Ms. Beckerly.
Present.
Mr. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Cole.
I am here.
Dr. Pierce.
Present.
Mr. Ragland.
Here.
Vice President Reyes.
She is here.
Unmute yourself from that.
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Board members, you received the agenda for our special retreat meeting this evening. We will adopt the agenda momentarily. Then we will turn things over to our facilitator, who I will introduce momentarily, to work through our long-term work, which involves inputs, outputs, and outcomes, community vision and values, and 5-year strategic planning. We will also talk about short-term work, specifically under COVID-19 and emergency priorities. And then we will talk about the next steps for our work, and then we will adjourn. And so that is our agenda for the evening. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay, please call the roll.
President Adair.
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Cole.
Yes.
Dr. Pierce.
Yes.
Mr. Ragland.
Yes.
Vice President Reyes.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you so much. So for members of the community who are watching this evening, this is a special board retreat, and a retreat is an opportunity for us, the board members, to kind of take a deeper dive and work on strategies to help us govern the district better. And so this is an opportunity for us to meet with our direct reports and talk through things that are important. And so in order to do that and to have a productive conversation, we have requested the assistance of AJ Crable from the Council of Great City Schools. We at Columbus City Schools are a proud member of this organization. And one of the things that the council does for us is provide us people like AJ who can help us through strategic planning and think through how to govern the best that we can. And as you know, if you've been following along with us, we are taking deep dives into a lot of our work on the academics. We're doing portrait of graduate. And so this is just the perfect time for the board to also take a good look at, hard look at itself, and making sure that we have all the tools we need to govern. I will say that we are 7 individuals that have to work collectively as your voice. We do not agree, and disagree is the best strength, best innovation. So that's why AJ is here. So AJ, if you'll pop your camera on while I introduce you. AJ Crable currently leads school board governance at the Council of Great City Schools. And before joining Council of Great City Schools, he served 4 years as the Texas Education Agency's Deputy Commissioner of Governance. And he was responsible for the agency's work regarding school improvement, charters, governance, complaint management, systems support and innovation, investigations, school discipline safety waivers, and district innovation. He also served prior to that as a school board member for the Kansas City, Missouri Public Schools. He is amazing. He has such a long resume that I'm not going to take the time to read it to everyone, but just know that AJ brings not only professional but I think personal experience to help connect to students of our district and our work. And board members, before we begin and before we have AJ begin, something we learned at Harvard was to talk about that question 0 to center us and level us. So if you could all agree with me today that our question 0, as is always when we meet, is to put our students first. And this will be a student-centered discussion, even though we are going to be focusing on our governance. So if you can agree with me today that that is what we will do, we will always put our students first, I will turn it over to AJ to now take the floor and lead us through the rest of our agenda. Thank you so much, AJ.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Board, Superintendent, Audit Executive, Treasurer. Thank you for having me this evening. Happy to be of service. To get things started, I actually want to pick up right where Jennifer left off. So if you could take a few moments, don't write anything yet, but prepare yourself because I want you to actually physically write something here in a moment. So find, pen, paper, but don't write anything yet. What I want you to do is I want you to think about your time in your current leadership role. I want you to think about the role that you currently serve in, the service that you currently render. I want you to think about a time in the future where your current service will come to a conclusion, where you will have served out your term, you will have served your time in the role that you're in. And at the end of your current service, imagine that you are looking back and you're thinking over what is it that I'm most proud of having accomplished in the time that I served. Don't write anything yet. I still just want you to contemplate for a moment. But imagine a time in the future as you are sitting here reflecting on your services just recently come to a conclusion. As you reflect back, what is it you most want to have accomplished? What is it that you'll be most proud of having done in your time in your current role in leadership? Take a few moments just to contemplate. What is it that you most want to have accomplished in your time in leadership? And having had a few moments to think about it, my request is this. In 10 words or less, please write down what it is that you most hope to accomplish during your time in your current role. In 10 words or less, what do you most hope to accomplish? When your time in this role is complete, what will you look back at and be most proud of having accomplished? 10 words or less, and yes, we will count them. If you could only accomplish one thing during your time in leadership, at the end of your current service, what will you be most proud of having accomplished? What is the thing that you most want to have done during your time in leadership in 10 words or less? I see some of you are still working, but some of you have completed. Who will be the first to share? What are your 10 words or less? Yeah, James, go for it.
All children graduate with options that lead to successful lives.
All children graduate with options that lead to successful, what was that last word?
Lives.
That lead to, options that lead to successful lives. Why is that important to you?
I of our country, really. That's really where we need to be going as a nation. It's making certain that students have an opportunity to go to college, get into a career, get into the military, become entrepreneurs, but be successful. I need to stop the prison pipeline. And that's the only way that we can do it. They need to have options. Options.
Yeah, our students have to have options. Thank you, James. Who will be the next to share? What are your 10 words or less?
Madam President.
Is that Michael?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
A highly proficient graduating student rate of 90% or better.
Highly proficient graduating rate of 90% or better?
Yes.
Why is that important to you?
that to me is the testament of the marathon that our students begin from the time at this point in time, they're pre-K students until the time that they graduate high school. That if we're able to see a 90% or better group of highly proficient students graduating from our school district, that spells out sustainability for us. That spells out the narrative of us being effective as a school district. That then spells out what Mr. Ragland just shared in terms of, a successful life post their experience with us.
I heard you say this is a marathon. Absolutely, from pre-K all the way through 12th grade, absolutely a marathon. I also heard you say not merely graduates, but the words you used were highly proficient graduates.
Yes, sir.
And you want to see it at minimum 90%. What percent today of your graduates, what percent today of your students are graduating highly proficient?
I believe our graduation rate as a
No,
whole.
yes, that's so not what I asked.
I'm not sure of what that highly proficient number is, but I do know our graduation rate is 81, 82%. Yes.
Yeah, but I hear you distinguishing between graduation rate and the highly proficient graduates. Am I hearing that correctly?
You did.
And so one of the things that we're going to spend a lot of time on today is if you can't measure it, then it's probably not something you can rely on happening. And so if highly proficient graduates is what's important to you, then the board's going to need to have a conversation about what that actually looks like.
I appreciate that.
Otherwise, you'll always be relying on graduation rate. And from the comments I hear you making, that doesn't cut it for you. Thank you for sharing. Who will be the next to share? What are your 10 words or less? Yeah,
Leadership in public service, facilitating change, and improving the community.
Leadership in public service, facilitating change, and improving the community. Why is that important to you, Eric?
It's what I've done my whole life. It's what's motivated me. And it's broader than just my school board service here in Columbus. It's 15 years of prior school board service. It's a judicial career. It's a career as a public sector lawyer. And I feel strongly about public service. It's something that both my wife and I have done throughout our careers, and facilitating change is a big part of that. Making it possible for people to change, for things to get better.
I hear you talking about the importance of people changing for things to get better.
Yes.
We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that, certainly this evening. And if at the end of this evening I actually get an invitation back, it'll certainly dominate conversations in the future. But I want to be crystal clear. At some point, I'm going to ask you the question, do you actually want it as badly as you think you do? And that won't be a time for you to shake your head and nod and agree. It'll be a time for you to reflect on how challenging the path forward that I'll support you in, but I can't walk for you. I can shine a light, but I can't take the steps. I cannot out hustle your children for you. You will have to do the work. You will have to make the sacrifices. The time is coming in this conversation where you're going to have to confront whether or not you are actually willing to make the changes in your individual behavior, or if you actually don't want it for children as badly as you claim to. And that's one of my favorite things about board service. We get a chance to see who we really are, a chance that a lot of people don't ever get to experience. We get to figure out, are we really about it, or are we just... I look forward to that conversation about change, Eric. Thank you.
So do I.
Tina, did you have your hand up?
I did not, but you know what? I will go.
Thank you.
Can I preface my statement by saying you said 10 words, so I just wrote down 10 words. Again, focused on the legacy that I want to leave in my life as a servant. And so my words were servant leadership, academic excellence, realized hope, success, equity, inclusion, and mentorship.
Yeah, servant leadership, hope, equity, leadership,
Realize hope.
success.
Realize hope.
Not merely hope,
I
but
think
hope
it's
made real.
important for our students, we give them a sense of hope, but that we help them understand they can realize that spirit, that encouragement, that passion, that motivation that we give for them. I don't want to just give them some Obama hope. I want to give them a realized hope. And that's what I'm here to do.
Yeah, I definitely hear the difference between hope that is somewhere out there maybe, and hope that is connected to something tangible here right now. Absolutely. Thank you. Who will be the next? What are your 10 words or less? Yeah, Carol?
I think it might be a touch more than 10 words, but I want to level the playing field so our students can successfully pursue their dreams.
I want to level the playing field so our students can successfully achieve their dreams. Yeah, that's more than 10 words. What would you think about that as a teacher? If your students came back to you with homework that had more than 10 words, Carol, what you doing over here? Why is that important?
I probably would be okay with it.
I'm messing with you. Why is that important to you, Carol?
Because I was a teacher and I saw the potential of so many kids and knew that, for various reasons, there were a lot of hurdles to their reaching their potential, and that's not right and we need to fix it.
In a lot of ways, our society apparently is not well designed to cater to the success of the students that you serve. They will have to fight for it. They will have to seize it. It won't be easily given. And either you will have prepared them adequately for the seizure of their own success and accomplishment, or you will have prepared them for failure.
Yes, because of what's stacked against them, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carol. Yeah, Jennifer.
So yeah, 10 words was hard for me. I actually went through several Post-its.
You're killing me tonight.
And I started with the way first part of equitable, but the more I've listened to this, and it all came down to, I just want every child, no matter their circumstance, to know that they are cared for and important. And for me, if they know that, then they can be the future leaders. And we can do that by ensuring that we're providing equitable access and great curriculum and being rigorous. But for me, my success would be to know that every student that leaves us and is with us knows how important and valuable they are to us.
Thank you. Ramona?
Okay. High academic success, prepared for life with an engaged district and community.
High academic success and prepared for life with an engaged district and community. Why is that important to you?
That's been my platform since I started. I have always said we cannot do what we do without our whole community, which includes our teachers, our parents. Everyone is responsible for the academic success of our kids because they're not with us all day. So to me, it's important that they're prepared academically and prepared for life. And that's our work, is to ensure that they're able to, my mom never knew how to read or write. So to me, it's, give them those tools that they need to, just like James said, to be prepared for a career, a business, whatever they want to do. But they're going to be able to at least have a fighting chance, and hopefully even more so prepared, because we want high academics, not just, we just want you to kind of sort of make it. We want you to just soar through the roof.
Yeah. Talisa, Carolyn, Stan, want to jump in here? What are your 10 words or less?
I can go. Exemplify the building of collaborative relationships leading to effective actions.
Why does that matter to you?
Because in any organization, or in the organizations I've been involved in, I've been in a leadership role, and it's been, I think, my responsibility to be the example of how you work collaboratively that results in actions. And we are an organization of actions, not just an organization of words, not just an organization of policies or procedures. We are an organization of action. They need to be effective actions, and I have to exemplify how we work collaboratively to achieve whatever those goals are, but we do that through action.
Thank you.
I'll go next.
Yeah.
And I apologize, it's more than 10 words. A sustainable office.
I'm going to audit this when you're done.
All right. A sustainable office that always asks, did this engagement help students achieve success?
Why is that important to you?
It's important because of our function, we can kind of get caught up in just doing audits and not asking, how did this engagement actually move the needle for students? So that's one of the things that I always start our team meetings with. You know, okay, what do we do that actually helps students? Because I always want my team, and when I'm gone, I want whoever sits in this seat to always be focused on, you know, the students, and that's why we're here. So that's why this is important to me.
I supported the auditing team in Texas for the state agency, and that was one of the things I absolutely appreciated about so many of our professionals, is that they understood that the function of auditing is not about counting things and evaluating things for the sake of having done so. Mm-hmm. It's about how do we make a difference? How do we position the organization to make a difference for children? So yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa?
Thank you. I kept it to 10, but I kept going back and forth. I put creating a culture where equitable opportunities are accessed by all.
Creating a culture where equitable opportunities are accessed by all. Why is that important to you?
It's important because I want to make sure that every student that comes to this district, they come because they know it's a great district and they know they're going to have the opportunities to be whatever they believe that they can be, because they have access to more rigor, they have access to athletics, the arts, whatever it is that they want to have access to, they will have access because we have clearly laid a pathway and made that available to all of our learners.
It's difficult to listen to you all and not notice a few things. One, I noticed a lot of commonality among a lot of the things that you all shared. There was a lot of overlap, a lot of shared visions, shared concepts. But then it's also notable what's missing. I didn't hear anybody say at the end of my time in office, I want to make sure that every kid got a Chromebook. I didn't hear you say, I want to make sure that we got new uniforms for the cheerleading squad, or I didn't hear you say, hey, we got the maintenance on that building right. We finally got the maintenance going on that building. I didn't hear you say, hey, you know what? We actually provided lunch for every kid. There's a lot of things that you didn't say. Almost everything you said had something to do with what will be made possible in the lives of students as a result of having been in your school system. Why didn't you mention all that other stuff?
It's in there.
It wasn't in your 10 words. Why didn't you mention all the other stuff? Where's the AstroTurf for the football field? How come that wasn't mentioned? Why wasn't having brand new pencils mentioned? There's a lot of stuff you didn't mention. Why not? Why didn't it make the cut?
I would say in our
Those
role,
are small.
I'm sorry. I would say in our role as board members, that is not our day-to-day responsibility. Our work, in the vein and spirit of your question, is largely aspirational, is largely guiding and thought around goals, and thoughts around measurable achievables. That's our space of thought and action. That would be my first kind of thought to why it is we didn't offer those day-to-day kind of renderings. And what I thought you were asking was aspirational.
Oh, you answered my question, but yeah, I think you answered it exactly the way it was intended. Now we're just analyzing what the answer was. Tina?
I guess the way I approach the question as a board member, we can achieve all of those things by creating equitable, inclusive policies that look at the broad success of our students. So whether it's a uniform, whether it's a Chromebook, whether it's a pencil, whether it's reliable transportation, our policies help to facilitate the student having access to those things.
Yeah, Jennifer?
For me, kind of what they said, but it comes down to the student. I mean, a lot of the things you mentioned were things and tangibles, and in reality, our kids don't take that with them. We're developing a whole person, and so I think for the board, a lot of what we talked about was developing that little mind and growing it, and what does it look like when it leaves, and that is what we do, and we bring that community voice, and we help our kids be the best that they can. We also are an employer on the other side who supports our whole team to do that. But a lot of that is the things, and we shouldn't be focused on the things so much as kind of board member Cole was saying. It is more about that bigger holistic vision, and how do we accomplish that. And that's the way I approach the question. All of those things you said were important, but are important in how we serve, and the things our students have. But in the grand scheme of things, for me, it became a feeling. I want to leave with a feeling, knowing that, my time has meant something to these children.
School systems exist for one reason and one reason only. School systems exist to improve outcomes for students, to cause improvements in what students know and are able to do. It is the only reason school systems exist. And what's remarkable is that existential nature of school systems is clearly written on your hearts, because when pushed to summarize your aspirations in 10 words or less, almost without exception, what I heard was, we've got to make sure that what our students know and are able to do when they leave here is sufficient for them to have access to the life that we want for them, and that they want for themselves. Your intrinsic inclination, when pushed to put it into words, is that school systems only exist to improve student outcomes and nothing else. That is an important grounding place in which to start. And every moment you lose track of that, children suffer for it. Your capacity to be transformative lives of students is going to hinge heavily on your ability to be disciplined and stay focused on those 10 words that you just wrote down. If you can do that, and your actions can be animated by that, then you can do great things for students. And every moment you get distracted from that, your behavior harms children. That's what it means to serve on the school board and to be an executive leadership for a school system. Any questions or comments before we proceed? Questions or comments before we proceed? This is often the point where somebody might want to suggest that there is some other reason for school districts other than improving outcomes for students. Anyone? Anybody? All right. So it is early in the evening. I haven't eaten in some time, and so I am hungry. If I am hungry, what is the outcome I want?
Be fed, be nourished.
Be fed, be nourished. If I'm hungry, what's the outcome I want?
Absence of hunger.
Absence of hunger. Jennifer, what'd you say?
A full tummy. That's what I said.
A full tummy. If I am hungry, why is food not the outcome I want?
This food is the mechanism to get to the outcome.
Yeah, it's a mechanism to get to the outcome, but it's not the actual outcome I want. Got it. If I am hungry, why is having money to buy food not the outcome I want? Ramona? And yes, cold calling is a thing. Get used to it.
Again, it's the means. I mean, the money is the means to get to the food. It's not the outcome. The outcome is you're no longer hungry. You got food in there.
Yeah, the outcome I want is to feel full. And the money is a means. Just because I have money doesn't mean I now magically feel full. It's a step in the direction. It's useful, but it's not the outcome I seek. It's an input. It's not the outcome. If I'm hungry, why is going to a restaurant not the outcome I want? Eric?
Again, that's just a means to get food. It's where you can get food, but it's not, it still doesn't do it for you. It still doesn't satisfy the hunger.
Yeah, these are all examples of inputs that, and inputs are important. They are important to begin our journey toward the outcome we want, but they are not the outcome. Why is it important that a governing team, and I describe the 10 of you collectively as a governing team, the governance body, the board itself, and its 3 direct reports. Why is it vital that a governing team be able to distinguish between inputs and outcomes? Why is it absolutely essential to your ability to serve children that as a governing team, you can distinguish between inputs and outcomes? Why does that matter? Yeah.
Because our job is outcomes. It's Lisa's job and the administration's job to figure out what those inputs need to be in order to achieve the outcomes that we set.
All right, so part of it is about role clarity. It helps establish that the work of the board is to represent the vision and values of the community, to really articulate what the outcomes the community wants, frankly, in exchange for its tax dollars that it wants on behalf of its children. The job of the board is to represent that vision and values. The job of the superintendent is to implement the vision and values. As wonderful as the superintendent is, she is not the community's representative. That is not why she has her job. That is not her role within the organization, to represent the community. The board's job is to represent the community and then to make plain what are the outcomes that our community wants. And then the superintendent's job is to go implement that. Why else? Why is it important for a governing team to be able to distinguish between inputs and outcomes? Stan?
Because in your example, there are many, many restaurants at which you can go to get your ultimate goal met. And if you lose your focus on the end goal, you'll spend all your time trying to pick which restaurant you're going to go to. And time passes and you're still hungry.
It's, yeah, even worse than that is to put it in a different way. And I see your hand, Carol, I'm coming to you. Is it the board that focuses on the inputs to the exclusion of attending to the outcomes is a board that sets its children up to fail? You'll spend so much time worrying about which sandwich a child has and do they have the right spork and do they have the right condiments and all this. And what you won't have paid attention to is that your children are starving. And so you can have all of the right stuff, but if the outcome you want for your children isn't being attended to, and as a governing body, you're not paying attention to that, then academically, your children could be starving and you have no way of knowing. Or to put it in the terms picked up from Michael earlier, you can spend all of your time talking about all of the inputs related to having a highly proficient graduate. And you can talk about, well, do we have the right ACT pre-test? And did we get, did they get help filling out FAFSAs? And did they have, this and that and the other? But if you don't actually have a way of measuring the outcome, your attendance to all of the inputs is not going to save your children. The board that focuses all of its energy on inputs to the exclusion of attending to the outcomes is a board that sets its students up to fail. Carol, what's on your mind?
I was going to say largely what Stan said, which is you get distracted if you're looking at focusing on the inputs from the outcome.
something, I, I can't remember, it may have been Tina who said earlier, something about the tangibility, that all those other things that I mentioned, that you all didn't bring up in your 10 words or less, they are very tangible. Like you can hold a book, you can hold a pencil, you can hold a uniform, you can hold these things. I think there is a seductive nature to tangible things, and the inputs are vastly more tangible than the outcomes. Can you hold a proficiency in your hand? It is an intangible, but it's also the reason the school system exists. But I think there's an easy seduction to get focused on that which is tangible for the reason that it is simply that it's tangible. Yeah, yeah, Tina.
So as I was reading your piece, and this piece really connects to the pre-read that you had us do, I kept going back to it. It defines our logic model. Our
It has
logic
to.
model, our what, why, and how we're doing it, and hopefully it does it in such a way that our community understands it, buys into it, and supports it.
Yeah. My nature is to generally be fairly direct with folks and just endure the reality that sometimes I won't get invited back. I have taken the liberty prior to this conversation to go back and review your agendas for your meetings going back about 6 months. How much time have you spent on the outcomes? It's not a rhetorical question.
Not enough.
Yeah, not enough, but not to make it no excuses. But we know that, and so that's part of why we're doing this. And if you looked at us a year ago, we've actually added more academic discussion, but we know it's not enough. And we know
Hold
that,
on, but I want to distinguish between academic discussions and discussions about the outcomes. So I've seen you have conversations about academics. It's like, oh, well, yeah, we have this program and that program. Are those inputs or outcomes?
Can I?
Inputs.
I'm going to gingerly disagree.
Yeah.
I think every bit of our conversations in a very targeted respect have been about outcomes. We all come to the table knowing, and if we don't, shame on us, but we all come to the table knowing our mission statement. That is that each child is highly educated, prepared for leadership and service, and empowered for success as a citizen in the global community. Everything that we vote on our consent agenda is the means, assists the means to that effect, to that outcome. So,
yeah, so what
I
you're
would venture
saying,
to say that a lot of our work is heavily, especially in the last 6 months, with a superintendent who we've required to report to us on a once per month basis, extensively on her operative work around academics. I think our work to that aim has been rich in discussion. So I just beg to differ slightly.
it's actually not a slight difference, it's a huge difference. And the reality is, no, it has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the outcomes. As a result of those conversations, did you come away with a better understanding of what student performance is right now in reality for the students that you serve?
We have not discussed measurables. We have not set goals, percentages, attainables. We're getting the input. We're getting it. To Michael's point, Dr. Dixon's given it to us, but we have not set a guideline to say, back to, actually somebody said it earlier, that this percentage of students are going to meet X. This percentage of students are going to meet X. This process, this thing that we just voted on is going to accomplish X, Y, Z. So we have not set those parameters as a board, and we have not discussed those as a board.
What's important to be clear about is the time you spend voting on things is by its very nature time spent on inputs. You are literally selecting with those votes the inputs that will be used in your school system. But the process of selecting inputs in no way reveals to you exactly what the outcomes will be because it hasn't happened yet. And so when I suggest that the board might want to spend time focused on the outcomes, it means you would actually leave the boardroom having clearly received information about what is it my students know and able to do now that they didn't know and weren't able to do a month ago or a quarter ago or a year ago. That only in those moments has your conversation been about the actual outcomes for students. When you are debating what to vote for, you are debating which inputs should we be deployed to try to create the outcomes we want. But if you spend all of your time selecting things off the menu, but never come actually get around to eating it or verifying whether it was eaten, you don't actually know what the outcome was. Your children could still be hungry. You bought them all the right stuff. You got them a nice peanut butter jelly sandwich. You paid for that. You voted and you bought them a peanut butter jelly sandwich. What you didn't do is check the outcomes, and you would have figured out the little AJ's allergic to peanuts. He's still hungry. You have been attending to the inputs. But right now, when I asked you directly, what percentage of your students are actually meeting that expectation that you have? That's not a question you all can answer because it's not a conversation you've been having. There is a distinction between discussing the inputs and the outcomes. The takeaway message here isn't don't focus on the inputs. The takeaway message is don't focus on the inputs to the exclusion of investing time in monitoring progress regarding the outcomes. That's all. You've been doing part of the equation. But if all you attend to is inputs to the exclusion of focusing on the outcomes you actually want for students, you will be setting your students up to fail. Questions or comments on this? This is a really important point. I appreciate Michael for helping lift up that distinction. Other questions about this distinction between a board being focused on inputs versus the board being focused on outcomes? Any other questions about that?
I don't have a question, but I think that it does
Yeah.
align with some of the information that we received from the audit as well around monitoring and not having policy around measurement of things. So I hear you. I also hear Board Member Cole as well. But yeah, I think that, you know, it aligns with information that we've already heard too.
Yeah, I did appreciate that part of the PDK audit where it explicitly called out the need of the board to put in place progress monitoring systems. And this is absolutely crucial because you don't just want to wait till the end of the game to know the outcome. You also want to know at the end of the first quarter, hey, coach, are we still in this thing? At the end of the second quarter, hey, coach, are we still in this thing? And if we're not, Coach Talisa, what plays are we going to call differently to get us back in this thing? And at the third quarter, so you don't want to wait all the way to the end. There are measures that you want in the middle of the cycle. Inputs are generally known at the beginning of the cycle. Outcomes are generally known at the end of the cycle. And in between those are measures that are used to tell you how is this implementation going and are we likely to get the outcomes we want. These measures in the midst of the cycle are referred to as outputs. Inputs are the resources that are applied at the beginning of the cycle. Outputs are measures in the middle of the cycle that give us some type of insight or to are we on track or not. And the outcomes are the measures that describe the results at the end of the cycle. Inputs, outputs, outcomes. What questions or comments do you have about inputs, outputs, or outcomes before we move on? What questions or comments? Yeah, Michael?
If you would give us a few examples of what you would see, what you would identify in a board conversation in terms of outcomes. And I'll ask this specifically for this reason.
I love this question.
Because we as a board have a lot of our outcomes discussions in executive session, not for hiding against the public or anything like that, but give us the space with our direct reports, for example, during evaluation and planning for evaluation, work that we're actually in the progress of right now, the process and progress of right now, right? These are outcomes conversations that we have with our direct reports. I perceive, and tell me if I'm wrong, I perceive the superintendent providing us reports summative reports on where we are with any part of our operations, whether academic or non-academic, as outcomes conversation. So if you gave me an extensive report on Project Fix It, for example, I know how many buildings we've utilized those dollars to affect and impact. I know the number of classrooms, over 600 classrooms have been affected by this. I've got that outcomes report. And these are recent conversations that we've had. So help me unpack that outcomes.
Yeah. So what you lift up is that we need to actually dive into this idea of outcomes one more layer. And then we need to be able to distinguish between two different types of outcomes: adult outcomes and student outcomes. Anybody have guesses? What's the difference between adult outcomes and student outcomes?
A student will be reading at a proficiency level of 80%.
Is that an adult outcome or a student outcome?
Student outcome.
Why would you say that's a student outcome?
Because it directly impacts the student.
It's not that it directly impacts the students, that it actually describes what students know or are able to do. And that's the key thing is it actually describing what students know or are able to do? Yeah, James, what would you say is the difference between student outcomes and adult outcomes?
I think that for me, the success of the student needs to come, if need be, the detriment of the adult. So because what you've put on the table is an either or proposition, right? We've done the adult things, and what I'm looking for from us is for us to have a student-centered approach to everything that we do, whether or not the adults like it or not. And I think, for me, the reason why we spend a lot of time on the inputs is because they are adult-driven type of issues. And, our outcomes, we need to be talking about what happens to our students once they leave this district. So sometimes that conversation cannot occur in the sanitized environment of a board meeting, right? What happens to our students if we don't equip them with all of the things that we say that we're desirous of equipping them with? And that's a very dirty conversation that we don't like having when the cameras are on. But that really is going to drive us towards focusing on the outcomes for the student. If our primary goal is to make sure that students are successful, then we've got to talk about what happens when they're not. And we have that, and it's quantified, and we can discuss those things. Those aren't pretty things to discuss, and really it's adults that say it's not pretty to discuss, and so that's why we don't do it.
So you're definitely going to have difficult conversations, and to Michael's point earlier, I think you're going to have difficult conversations, in public forums as well as in non-public forums. But how you have those conversations matters.
Can I chime in just a quick second, AJ?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure that we answered the question for you. I think the question of the difference between adult and student is based on values. If we start from the center premise that we represent the community, then if it's about a student-centric, to my brother Ragland's comments, if it's about what is student-centric, then we have to know what students value. And we have to bring those arguments and those comments to the table and represent them the best and most judicious way that we possibly can, the most prudent way we possibly can. So in my mind, and help me understand if I'm off, but my idea of this is that it's based on what the student values. To me, that would be the cutting line between what is more adult focused in a conversation and in our work versus what is more student focused, by knowing what students value.
So no, I
okay,
wouldn't land. Hold on. So I wouldn't land there as a definition. where I would land is that student outcomes are any outcome measurements at the end of the cycle that describe what students know and are able to do. If it is a measurement of what students know and are able to do, then I describe it as a student outcome. And basically any result that the school system produces that isn't a measurement of what students know or are able to do, I describe as an adult outcome. And so adult outcomes include, you get a financial audit at the end of the year. That's an adult outcome. It tells you what the adults did, but looking at the annual financial audit doesn't tell you anything about whether little AJ can read or not. If you all completed a capital campaign and you built all the buildings, that is an adult outcome. That is work that the adults completed. But having completed a bunch of buildings doesn't tell you whether or not little AJ is numerate. And so when I'm distinguishing between adult outcomes and student outcomes, the key distinction I want you to lean into is adult outcomes, student outcomes are measurable indicators at the end of the cycle of what it is that students know and are able to do. And adult outcomes are any other outcomes that the school system creates that aren't student outcomes. This is important explicitly because the school system exists for one reason and one reason only. The only reason the school system exists is to improve student outcomes. But if you are spending all your time talking about adult outcomes and think you're talking about student outcomes, then once again, as a governing team, you are setting students up for failure. So if you spend all your time talking about here are the great things our adults did, then you've had a meaningful conversation about adult outcomes. But if you don't know if those things your adult did actually led to improvements in what students know are able to do, then you did not do your job as a board. And there's no sidestepping, there's no stepping away from it. School systems exist for only one reason, that's to improve student outcomes. Now, I need to step back to one thing James said here is, I want to clean up one thing. Talisa, is it about 85% of your budget is salaries and benefits, somewhere in that range? Stan, I don't know who wants to weigh in on this.
It would be if it wasn't for how the state handles our charter school payments. But
So
on paper, it's 66%. But if you take that charter funding mechanism, which is an accounting, I think, anomaly, we would be in the 85 to 90%.
Yeah, the amount that you all actually spend on your operations is around 85%. So the thing to take away from that is that education is a people business. That day in and day out, what do you serve, about 40,000 students? 50,000 students. Day in and day out, you are relying on people to make the difference for those 50,000 children. And so none of this is to suggest that your people aren't important, the adult outcomes are important, the inputs aren't important. None of this is to suggest that. But it is to suggest that if all of that happens, but it doesn't generate improvements in student outcomes, then as a board, you have not accomplished the work to which you were selected. That you can do everything right for the adults, but if it doesn't translate into improvements and outcomes for students, you didn't get the job done. And the problem is that as a board, your way of knowing whether or not it's working is you have to be monitoring progress toward those student outcomes. And to really be transformative, to really drive process improvements and change management within the organization, you really are going to need to do a certain amount of that in a very structured way, a very disciplined way, and also in a very public way. That your community and particularly your staff will need to see, oh, you know what? I've watched the board meetings for the last 6 months, and what I'm convinced of is that this board spends all their time talking about adult inputs and adult outcomes. That must be what they care about the most, because that's what I see them talk about the most. So when your community and when your staff see that you are still being appropriately attentive to those matters, but they also see that you are prioritizing spending time actually monitoring progress relative to the outcomes you want for your students, then it starts to send a message, oh, this is also something that they value, and that this is something that we as a community and as a staff are going to have to rally around. Be careful the message your use of time sends. People may actually watch you and derive from how you spend your time what it is you value most. And let me assure you of this, from my review of your last 6 months, no one is taking away that the thing you care about most is the 10 words you put on paper. Eric, you had your hand up, and then Carol, I saw your hand.
Yes, I did. And I really wanted to say something back while James was talking, and I'm not sure that I heard it accurately, but I thought I heard him say at one point that it was a zero-sum game, and that we can't do both student outcomes as well as adult outcomes. And yet I don't see it that way. I may have misheard, but I think that we can benefit both students and adults, and that we have to do both in order to be effective as school board members. We need to negotiate with our teachers. We need to pass additional levies to be able to pay for the programs that we want. We need to take care of a lot of adult things. That's part of our business, but not at the expense of student outcomes. And certainly it makes sense to spend lots more of our public time on the student outcomes. I agree with that, but we have to do both, and I think we can do both successfully.
Yeah, so I don't think anyone's suggesting that you can magically educate 50,000 students without the rest of the adults. Like they are a necessary component. So what I'm suggesting, and what I think James is alluding to as well, is an additive effect. That if you do all of that, but it doesn't actually get the student outcomes you wanted, then as a board, you weren't focused on the things that you need to be focused on. That
Correct.
attending to all the adult inputs and adult outcomes is necessary but insufficient. There's one other thing that James said that I think is probably what triggered what you're reflecting on. And what I heard him speaking to is the nature of sacrifice. That if there is a circumstance that comes up and something is great for students, but inconvenient for adults, that as a board, you're going to have to make the choice that adults are probably going to have to be inconvenienced on this.
Sure.
And this is I don't know about, I got 5 boys. This is the same type of decision that every parent's ever had to make. It's like, you know what, I really want to go out and live my best life, but apparently I got to get this boy to football practice. In that moment, I'm making a sacrifice as the adult for the benefit of the student. The majority of the time in my household, the vast majority of the time, what works to really have my life be great also works to have my boy's life be great. But there are specific times in the life of my family where we're not both going to have the exact day that we want. And more often than not, it's my responsibility as a parent to in those moments choose the needs of my children over my own needs in the moment. That there are times when that comes up. It's not often. Now, I'd say in public education, 95% of the time, day in and day out, if it's really going to lift up and breathe possibility into the lives of your teachers and your principals, like that's going to accrue to the benefit of your students. But to James' point, I think it would be naive not to acknowledge that there will be moments where there are things that are inconvenient for adults, but that nevertheless are necessary for the well-being of children. And
Sure.
in those moments, to suggest that school systems exist to improve student outcomes suggests that your decision on where you land in that moment is already made the second you took the oath of office. That's what I think James was talking about.
Yeah, and that makes sense, and your analogy is a good one.
Other reflections before we move on. Inputs, outputs, outcomes, adult outcomes, student outcomes. Other questions or reflections before we transition? All right. Well, that was easy enough. So as we recognize then that the school system exists for one reason and one reason only, to improve student outcomes. The problem is that there's it's a big community, and the community, not all community members are going to have the exact same worldview on which outcomes we should be focused on, and which types of values that should be honored on the path to accomplishing those outcomes. There's just too many people in the community. There's not always going to be agreement. And so somebody along the way came up with this bright idea. If we can't get every member of the community in the room to make these type of decisions, let's select some representatives to go into a room and do this work on our behalf. We refer to this group of representatives as a school board. This reveals that the function of the school board is to represent the vision and values of the community. This is your function, to represent the vision and the values of the community. The superintendent's function is to implement. The treasurer's function, the chief auditing executive's function is to implement the vision and values of the community. The function of the board is to represent the vision and values of the community. Now, the challenge is, I've already kind of figured out, you put the 7 of you in the room, and collectively, you all aren't going to see things the same way either. So we still got this problem that we don't have this clear sense of vision and values. And so when the board comes together, in order to gain clarity around which vision and values will drive the work of this school system, the work of the board then becomes to identify a set of goals that say, what are the specific outcomes for students that we want to see created? The goals are the board's way of reaching consensus around the vision. We can't have this be nebulous. We can't have it be out there and everybody has their own version. The board needs one solitary description of what is the vision of this community. And the way you articulate that is by adopting a set of goals that describe what are the outcomes we want over the next 3 to 5 years. What do we want our students to know and be able to do 5 years from now that they don't know and aren't able to do right now? And as the board codifies those goal statements, what they're really doing is saying, this is a community's vision made into clear statements that then our direct reports can go and actually implement. Prior to that, your 3 direct reports are implementing based on their best judgment. That's what you leave them with, is they have to use their best judgment to figure out, okay, as I listen to these 7 people, I think I know what the consensus vision is, but I don't really know. And it leads to a lot of ambiguity. And then what happens is really fun, is what they interpret to be the consensus vision isn't. And instead of acknowledging that the board failed to make the vision plain, which is a biblical expectation that goes back long before school boards, the board failed to make the vision plain and is now mad at your direct reports for not implementing the vision you didn't clarify to begin with. It is absolutely essential that the board identify what are our goals for student outcomes. And they need to be as measurable, they need to be SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, results-focused, time-bound. They need to be as smart as possible so there can be clarity. Either we got there for children or we didn't. There can be no lack of clarity on this point. Either the resources and the people that we deployed got the job done for our children, or they did not. There should be a binary understanding. That is the level of clarity that your children require of you. But it's not just the vision that the board represents. The board also represents the values of the community. Because while the vision says, where are we trying to go to for children? The values say, wait a minute. Along the journey, what values of ours need to be honored? And I've heard you all in various conversations over the last 6 months lift up a variety of values. Sometimes the values around being economically responsible and all the various permutations of that. Sometimes the values are around being equitable in your distribution of resources and all the various permutations of that. Sometimes the value is around getting input and engagement, from members of the community, from staff, from families and students. There are a set of values that you have that say, on our way to the vision, what are the values that need to be honored? Well, in the same way that the vision needs to be clear, the values need to be clear as well. And it's your obligation as a board to write the values down and make them plain. I refer to these state policy statements of values made crisp, clear, made plain as guardrails. And so we start with the community selects representatives, the board selects a set of goals and guardrails that are the stand-ins for the community's vision and value. And that is what your 3 direct reports then utilize in their day-to-day work. When you do this, that actually allows you as a board to bring coherence, because now you actually have something that your auditors said you need. And when you've adopted a set of goals and guardrails, then you actually have metrics that are able to be monitored over time. So each month during your board meeting, you can figure out, okay, we said that we're starting here. 5 years from now, we want our children to be here. Are we here? Are we here? Are we here? Are we actually seeing growth over time? What is the trajectory? Are we seeing improvement? The challenge is right now, the 7 of you collectively, from my listening over the last 6 months, have between you all roughly 20 different ideas of what the vision and values should be. And your administration is going to continue to struggle because you failed to hire people who are telepathic. That's your failure as a board. If you want people who can read your minds, hire for that next time. If you don't want that, then do the responsible thing and write the vision and values down and make them plain so people don't have to guess. This is the next layer of the board's work as it relates to strategic planning for the next 5 years. As a board, you need to write down the vision and values. You need to identify a set of goals and guardrails that your direct reports can then use to create a 5-year implementation plan. That is the next step in strategic planning, is the board codifies the vision and values. We refer to those as goals and guardrails. And then the superintendent takes that and creates the implementation plan for the academics. Your treasurer and audit executive will take that and create their long-term plans. And the collective document from all of that is your 5-year strategic plan. And so before we dive into the nuts and bolts of the 5-year strategic plan, I just want to stop here and get questions, whether from board members or staff, about this idea that there are really 2 phases to strategic planning. The first, the board has to write down the vision and values and make them plain. And then second, staff needs to go out and develop plans based on the clarity offered through the goals and guardrails. What questions do you have about these 2 phases of a 5-year strategic planning process? Yeah, Michael?
Thank you. So what I'd like to be able to glean from you is, what if 2/3 of that process has been accomplished? And what I mean is that in a previous iteration of our board, did this work, and we did this work intensively. We have codified our vision and values. We have codified that. I think because we have a new administration, what I like to glean from you is how do we work better together in embedding those values?
Yeah, so one of the things is that once, so I'm not clear that the 7 of you have those. I've looked through a lot of your documents, and I haven't seen items that I would describe as SMART goals around student outcomes that specifically say, so for example—
I'm not speaking to SMART goals around the outcomes. I'm speaking specifically to your guardrails comment.
Yeah. So the guardrails part also has to be adopted. And so you do have some statements that start to look like, what are the values we want adopted? I know that you already had some in a previous version, the 1920 version of kind of your strategic outline that the superintendent put together. And I've seen those lifted up a little bit in some of the other work products you all have done. So I think you're a little bit closer on some of those, but I still think it would be valuable for the board as a whole to be really clear about, here are 1 to 5 values that are the most important values that need to be attended to, and here are the 1 to 5 goals that are the most important goals that need to be attended to. That kind of narrowing and clarifying that all 7 of you have acknowledged that these are the ones that the board's adopted and that we're challenging our staff with. So to your point, I don't think this is a start over thing. I think you nailed it. I think you all are already in the midst of the work. A lot has already been done. It's just a matter of making it sharper and much more clear so that your staff has that to work from, and so that you have the information you need to monitor. To be blunt, when we have this conversation 12 months from now, and I ask you what percentage of your students are proficient graduates, I expect all 7 of you to be able to rattle off a percentage and be a heartbeat. Hey, you know what? We started at 30% 4 years ago. We're trying to get to that 90% by August of 2025. Well, let me tell you right now, we've made it from that 30%. Right now, we're about 47. But the superintendent, we've seen the strategic plan she came up with. We see how she's going to get us from this 47 we're at over the next 5 years to the 90 we're trying to be at. When you can rattle off with certainty exactly what is true in the lives of your students in a measurable fashion, that's when you'll know that you have the type of monitoring system in place that the PDK audit suggests is currently lacking. Yeah, Eric?
Yeah, I think that, yes, and I got to participate with the board when we last visited the mission statement and the goals and did all that work, and it was good work. And I think we've got as you said, a good starting point.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we've got a majority of the board has changed. We've got 4 new board members who were not around at that time. Plus, we've had experiences in the district, including dealing with COVID-19 that has really changed thinking in a big way for many people, including about how we educate our kids. And I think that it is a good time for us to revisit all of those fundamental things that we've put down and see if they're still true. It's a great starting point, but I think we need to take a fresh look at it.
Yeah. Again, I definitely want to reiterate that point that you all have started a lot of this work. There's already a lot to be leveraged, and so this isn't with some school systems. They're really starting from zero. I've worked with a number of boards that have no goals, have had no goals in decades. One of the things is, even had you done this flawlessly last year, you could not have predicted last year that you would basically be erasing 6 months of learning off of the books this year. And so even school systems I'm working with who have gone through this process and have really put those metrics in place have still had to go back and modify those to account for either the reality that 6 months of learning is nationwide pretty much gone, regardless of no disrespect to your staff or to any others around the country, but I am not seeing student learning growing by leaps and bounds right now. I'm seeing at best adults working their heroic best to try to maintain place so that students don't slide too far backwards. But even if you had done the goal setting perfectly, that phenomenon is now something you're confronting, and so you probably have to make adjustments. And so this is not an indictment, of where you are, but it is a clarification that there's a little bit more work to be done, and if you're willing to commit yourselves to doing it, you can knock this out pretty quickly. Tina?
Thank you. I just want to ask that we acknowledge that there's not an assumed no information asymmetry. In your discussion of values and vision, there's an assumption that our direct reports don't have an understanding or data or information related to the values of our community. In some instances, they have a better pulse on that than we do as board members. As board members, we're contacted by specific constituencies, but as direct reports, specifically Dr. Dixon can reach out to the entire district and do a survey, and her team can look through that data and they can massage that data and analyze it and understand it. So I think it's important to know that at times there's information asymmetry. Board members may have more information than administrators have at a particular time, but administrators may have more information than board members have at another time. And I think it's also important to note that when the initial mission of the district was revisited or crafted, our district looked very different than what it looks now. As we look at the social, economic, and political inequities in the city of Columbus, as we look at the growing number of charter schools that we have that our families now can choose to send their students to, it's a very different playing field than we had before when we talked about making sure that students are highly educated and prepared to go into all these fields. What happens when you're highly educated, but that field door has been shut because of racism, sexism, genderism, because of the level of, or lack thereof, of employment opportunities that your parents had? This is the very real reality that our students are dealing with. And we have to, at some point, as Board Member Ragland said, acknowledge that this is a different level of pressures that our community faces now. And I think COVID-19 just brought it to the forefront in a new way.
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. Ramona?
So we did look at the mission, and about 4 years ago, so it hasn't been that long ago that we looked at it. And I think we tweaked it just a little bit, but we were really focused on the vision and the goals, to Michael Cole. But what we didn't do, AJ, is finish and create the metric and evaluation piece of the work. So it's in between what Cole and Brown said. Is like we had a lot of a change through those years, not making excuses. We had a lot of change through those years, and we kept trying to go back and kept trying to go back, and we didn't schedule out the work of the board. And we kept working on the inputs and trying to kind of put up fires. So I'm hopeful that we are now going to bring all that stuff together. I think what Michael was trying to say, that, and it was a lot of work. It was probably about, I don't know, two meetings a month. I know Stan was there, Carolyn was there, Michael Cole, myself, and then Eric came in at the end. So it does take, to your point, a lot of work, short bites, because after a while people were getting upset, and it takes a lot of work, and there was a lot of passion in the room. So there was a lot of good work, and it will have to be adjusted. It'll get to be changed, and I'm excited to see that. We used to have that. We redid it. We revisited it with a new board. Now we have a new board, new circumstances, and I think it's an opportunity for us to move forward and get the information that everybody has to give.
Yeah, Jennifer?
So I just wanted, because we have done work, as Michael said, and AJ, I know I sent you our draft version of we call our leadership platform, and I'm wondering if you can help us figure out what that is. Is that goals? Because we've done work on it, and I just want to make sure that we know we're what bucket we're putting it in.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Jen, can we make sure I know what Jen's talking about. Jen, are you talking about the 2-pager that we were kind of circulating? Perfect. Thank you.
Other questions, other comments?
I want to say that when I started in the district, I asked the board, one of the things they had on hold was a strategic plan that we were going to implement. And what I did, I asked the board to engage in we had a retreat, and I took the strategic plan and I just tore it apart and I put it in my office. I just spread it on all four walls of my office and had my team members and board members come in and say, hey, is this the same? Are these the same goals now that you had when we started this?
Yeah.
And could we come together and talk about to make sure that this is the work that they wanted me to implement?
Yeah.
And so we took that. And what I did ask, I said, can we pause on this plan? And while I and my team come together and we work on some visioning exercise, I knew we had some audits that I wanted to make sure that we started, but would they allow me to work on 4 strategic goals for this year? So they've allowed me to work on those 4 strategic goals for this one year, as we continue to work on some of the other stuff that Jennifer, that 2-pager. So yes, to everyone's point, there was a lot of starts and stops. I, as a new superintendent, wanted to make sure that the work that we was going to work on was the right work at that time. I didn't want us to move forward and not be clear, as you stated, coming in as a new superintendent, been very clear about what those goals are as represented by the community, and learning the information that I had learned in my first 100 days, 60 days. So they did allow me to move forward. So that document that you've seen this 1 year is a 1-year piece. So to everyone's point, we do need to go back and revisit some of these other pieces to this.
So I want to give you a tangible opportunity to actually practice. We're not adopting anything. We're not creating any final anything. I just want to make sure that you have some practice so that you as a board can distinguish between what I mean when I talk about SMART goals about student outcomes, so that what you are creating is actually going to meet your needs down the road. To give you some insights into this, first I want to just back up and I'm going to try to share my screen here and put some slides up. I don't know if you can see that or not. Can you see the slide?
We can see it.
Yes.
Okay, so it says that the percentage of students from our pre-K program who enter kindergarten ready will increase from 20% in August 2019 to 80% by August 2023. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so back up right quick. So we started with input, outputs, and outcomes, and I will show these slides with you once we're off the line. Outcomes, and so now what we want to do is think about outcomes, and for those goals to be meaningful, I'm going to suggest that they need at least these things, that they need some agreed. So this goes using Michael's example, because I think the first of our students are actually a level of proficiency at grad.
Hey, AJ, I think when you shared your screen,
But
your
we'd also
connection got really bad.
Now we lost them.
Okay. So that didn't work out. All right. Technology isn't always our friend. But what you're seeing in the examples that I put up the screen is trying to demonstrate there are a few characteristics you want. And so I'll just walk through them quickly. You want each goal to have a clear starting point and ending point. You know, if it's 30% of our students can do this now, and we want that to be 90%. Or, you know, maybe it's 40% now, and we want it to be, you know, 67%. So you want a clear starting point and a clear ending point. What you also want is a clear starting date and a clear ending point. Okay, so 30% of them can do that as of August 2019, and we want to run this out for 5 years, so we want 90% of them to be able to do that by August of 2024. Like, you want a clear starting date and a clear ending date, so that we aren't at all confused about not only which data we're talking about, but, you know, on what one specific timeline. And then you also want to be really specific about the population that you're trying to serve. Are we talking about every single student in the system? If we're talking about graduates, we're not. We're only talking about the students who actually are having to graduate to reach graduation. So that's not talking, for example, about the students who dropped out prior to graduation. And so you really want to be specific about which population of students are we trying to focus on. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a moment and I want you to write down no more than 3 potential goals that describe a student outcome you'd want to see the district accomplish 5 years from now. We're not legislating anything. Don't get attached or married to these. This is just an activity to gain some understanding. If you're going to come up with 3 goals that describe the outcomes for students, 3 goals that describe what it is that students don't are able to do, they need to have a clear starting point and ending point. You may not know the data, so just make something up for this, for the purpose of this activity. And it needs a clear starting date and an ending date. And I will be silent for just a moment while you all work on that, and I'll try to show the screen with some examples so that you have an idea of what I mean. So take a few moments and try to come up with no fewer than 1, no more than 3 goals that you think might make sense for your school system. I'll give you just a few more minutes. All right, so I know some people are still brainstorming, but I see some of you've got some ideas on paper. Who wants to be the first to share? And understand, this is a learning activity, so there'll be some fine tuning. That's just the nature of this activity. It's perfectly normal. Who give us the first? Yeah, Eric, I saw your hand go up first.
All right.
Michael, you're on deck.
Today, 20% of our students participate in career tech education and are gainfully employed in their field of study 3 years post graduating. Want to move that to 50% within 5 years.
All right, so I heard two different things in there. I heard students studying VOTEC and I heard students employed. Which of those is it?
Both.
No, you
That 20% have participated and are gainfully employed in their field post-grad.
So this would only count students who, so if a student went through your welding program and then got a job as a welder, that would count. If a student did not go through your welding program, but then got a job as a welder, that would not count. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So you specifically essentially what you're measuring is what is the effectiveness of our vocational program at actually supporting students at being employed in that. And as a side, it's also making the assumption that students who go through your vocational program, that they'll want to get a career in the area that they were trained in. I don't know that that is a reasonable assumption to make. So maybe a student goes through your welding program, but decides later on that what they really love is carpentry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I could easily revise it to saying that they're gainfully employed 3 years after graduation.
And so that's why I was asked initially, is like, which of those is most important to you?
Right.
And I suspected it was the really the outcome.
Yeah.
Because whether or not they're taking VOTEC is not a student outcome. You want to be real clear. This is a great example that Eric lists up. Whether or not your students take vocational education is not a student outcome. The presence of that course describes what adults are making available, not what students know and are able to do. Now, if it was one of your students teaching the vocational program, that might be different. But I don't know that your third graders are out here teaching welding right now. So this is probably an adult outcome, is whether or not you had the courses. The student outcome is what was actually made manifest in the lives of students as a result of having gone through those. What were they able to do? And I actually heard you say something that is really interesting to me. Did I hear you say 3 years after graduation?
I did.
So this is a powerful statement, because what Eric is suggesting is that the way that as I reflect on the values of the community as I understand them, the community is not satisfied with us having graduated students who have vocational capacity at the date of graduation. The community's vision, as I understand it as an elected official, is that they really want students to actually have that gainful employment in those areas 3 years after they've left. Am I understanding you correctly, Eric?
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah. Be clear. That is a vastly
That's what I said and meant, yes.
That is a vastly more bold goal to put forth than to simply say we graduated students who know something about vocational technology. Got it. So thank you for going first and for letting us use that to workshop. Questions or comments about Eric's before we go to Michael? Questions or comments about Eric's example before we move to the next example?
So my question, I guess, would be, if 50% of them are going into vocational, what are the other 50% doing? Are they going into college? Are they going into the military? I mean,
so this is a great question.
Is huge.
So I've worked with some other boards that are wrestling with the same thing. I was actually working with a state agency recently that was trying to identify what is it that we really want. And they actually came to the same conclusion you did, Tina. Is what they want is students who are either gainfully employed 2 years after college, or 2 years after high school graduation, or finishing up a 2-year program, or finishing up a 4-year or in the midst of a 4-year program 2 years after high school graduation. And so they came up with a slightly more complicated metric, but that encapsulated the fullness of their community's values, and saying, okay, yes, so this is one thing that we might want for them 2 years after they leave us, but these other things would be acceptable. So as long as it's one of these 3 things, then they count, and then that's part of the denominator that we want to see us growing the numerator toward. Yeah, great question. And that's exactly the type of thing that as a board you want to wrestle with when you're thinking about goals in this way. Other questions or comments on Eric's example before we move to Michael? Yeah, Jennifer? Apparently you don't want to talk to me right now. All right.
There we go. Sorry, having a little technical issue here. So in like that measurement of the goal, because it is hard to measure things that we don't control 2 years after graduation. So I also had career tech as one of mine, but I was talking more about the things that they can do in school. So I know one thing that we talk about and our community is interested in is them obtaining other technical certifications and making sure that they graduate with those so that they can go out. And so I had one around that. But I guess my overall comment was thinking about things that we can actually measure as part of the creation of the goals.
Abandon that. Right now you're being reasonable. Good news, that's not your job. Your job is to represent the vision and values of the community. And so if the vision and values of the community, and so I'm working with another board, one of the goals they're looking at is the percentage of students who graduate with an associate's degree or industry certification. Those are, at the point of graduation, we want to increase the percentage of students who either have an industry certification or an associate's degree. And that is a reflection of their community's vision as best they understand it. And this other community I'm working with, they're saying, nah, graduation doesn't mean anything to us anymore. We want to know that they're actually set up for success 3 years after. And so in both cases, I think they're right. What they've done is they're listening to the vision of their community and reflecting that. Your task isn't to be reasonable about what's measurable. Your job is to be a zealous representative of the vision of your community. And wherever that leads you, that's where it leads you. And it'll shake out in the end because everything is measurable. Anything at all that you want to measure is measurable. Some things will cost more money to measure than other things. If I want to know how tall my third graders are in inches, that's not an expensive measurement. If I want to know how tall my third graders are in nanometers, I'm going to need some expensive $1 million piece of machinery down at the University of Ohio to help and bring all of them and put them in this huge machine that scientists pull the big crank. That's going to be more expensive, but I can measure it if I want to. So the key thing to figure out isn't which one is more expensive or less expensive. The first key thing for the board to figure out, which one of these most aligns with the vision and values of my community. And so that's the challenge. And your staff, they'll figure it out. So it may very well be that as a result of this process, the board's understanding of the community's vision as codified into goals involves something that currently is not measured. And when that happens, Talisa, what are you going to do?
Figure out how to get it measured.
So figure out how to get it measured. Now, what you need to know is what she's going to do. She's going to come back to you and say, all right, Jennifer, we can do that. We can measure it.
I need some money.
Here's what it'll cost to measure it.
There you go.
And here's how much time it'll take away from instruction or other things like that. And she'll let you know the cost, and you'll have to decide, okay, so do we really want that? Do we want that 6 years post-graduation, or would we be satisfied with a slightly more affordable 3 years post-graduation? Or does it honor our community's values to be comfortable with the day of graduation? But anything can be measured. Absolutely abandon your instincts toward being reasonable as part of this part of the process. The opportunity to be thoughtful about that, should we be more reasonable in our metric, do that later. Right now, the sole purpose is to try to capture what is the vision of our community. Great question. Thank you for lifting that up. Michael, you're up. What do you got?
All right, thank you. So I've been listening to everyone, and I've been hearing you, and what I'm getting a sense of is how I've combined student outcomes with adult outcomes. My first is create expansion into universal pre-K with our five-star rated program. That would start in 2021, ideally with an increase of 1,700 seats, 1,700 seats, and then grow into ideally as many as identified needed to be able to capture a pre-K population of students that could be introduced into Columbus City Schools. My second is expansion and pathways for CTE that begin in 6th grade and run through 12th grade. For me, that would be a thought of 30% increase in building capacity for students, but moving backward to 6th grade. So creating that pathway opportunity for parents to pathway, I won't say fast track, but pathway their child from the 6th grade on through the 12th grade to a CTE credential of some sort in over 30 programs. And the idea from the student focus aspect of it is that the outcome is going to be increased scores in math and reading. Ideally ensuring that each of our buildings where we have 6th through 12th graders or 6th graders on up, that we're seeing a B level in grade or higher, okay? A B level in grade or higher, with the outcome of strengthening math and numeracy and literacy. The last piece is graduation rate beginning as early as 21, 22 of 83% to by the end of 5 years, 85% or higher in graduation rate. If you're telling me, Michael, don't try to be reasonable, be forcefully aspirational, then I'm saying by the end of that 5-year term, we should be looking at 90% or higher.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch to unpack. The second two things around student literacy and numeracy and what's true of your graduates, those sound like student outcomes. And so you appropriately identified those. So those would be eligible to be goals. The first two things you identified were about providing more CTE programming, even earlier ages, and providing pre-K at even earlier ages. Neither of those are examples of goals because those are adult outcomes. And so I could see both of those first two things you mentioned, I could see as being guardrails. Part of the community's value is we want to see more CTE programming, we want to see more pre-K programming. But I would be very intentional about not identifying those as goals because those describe what the adults are doing. They don't describe what students are able to do. You really want to narrow the focus of your goals to just what is it that we want our students to know and be able to do. And then the guardrails be the focus of what are the other values that need to be honored along the path to accomplishing the goals that we have for what students don't are able to do. But with that correction, yeah, that sounded fairly spot on. You had clarity about what percentage are we at now and what percentage are we trying to get to. One other thing I would clarify, when I said now is not the time to be reasonable about what should be measured. That's absolutely the case. But when you've decided what to measure, the metric does have to be SMART: specific, measurable, attainable,
relevant,
results-focused, time-bound. And so I encourage you to be, to not worry about reasonableness and deciding what should we be measuring, but you will have to be thoughtful about what is actually attainable when you decide what the actual goal would be. So are we jumping from this percentage to this percentage is a question of attainability. The reason for that is the goals are intended to be accomplishable. If they're not, worry is that you leave your staff feeling like they're chasing something that has set them up to fail. And so unreasonable in being clear about what does the community want us to measure, but then attainability around how much growth can we make over the next 5 years. Does that distinction make sense?
Yes.
Other questions or comments about Michael's examples? Particularly lean into the latter two around student literacy, numeracy, and about what's true in the lives of our graduates. Yeah, Tina?
Can I contribute to his by adding one of mine to his?
Oh, yeah, jump in.
So when we talk about graduation and opportunities, again, our mission being that our students are highly educated and prepared to be active citizens in this global society. That hinges on mathematic literacy and just regular reading and writing skills. And so for me, one of my goals was that by 2024, 80% of our 8th graders are proficient in pre-algebra. That puts them on a track to take algebra in high school. That puts them on a track to be able to, if they want to do a career in construction, masonry, or if they want to go to college, or if they want to go to the military, they can go into a higher grade position versus a lower grade position, i.e. you peeling potatoes versus you flying a plane. So that was one of my goals. So that contributes to board member Coe's when we think about those last
And
goals.
if I can add to that, that was what I had too. I just had the number of 8th graders who are ready to take 9th grade algebra, because
There we go.
that's still that gatekeeper. So if we can look at the number, I put the number of 8th graders who enter 9th grade ready to take, with that credit, because you can take, we have many 8th graders who are ready to take algebra 1 as well. But then the number of 8th graders who are ready for algebra 1 in the 9th grade. That's key to that, students being able to take more rigor and being ready for college. And there's a lot of research that talk about that algebra 1 is still the gatekeeper. So, I think we got a trifecta going on that is so important.
Do you have a sense of where you're starting at right now? What percentage of your 8th graders are ready for that now?
No, but I can get that. I don't have that right now.
Oh, no, that's not important right now. But yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of evidence around that being a really important metric. Carol.
I focused on reading. And I said that the reading levels of 5th grade students will increase from whatever percentage of grade level. The reading levels of 5th grade students reading at grade level will increase from whatever the current percentage is to 90% as measured at the end of 2024.
Oh, sounds like a superintendent's filling you on that one. I'm seeing some snaps happening.
I know. I said the same thing.
Carol, why 5th grade?
I don't know, and there's probably research to suggest what the right grade is, but just from my experience, I've seen a lot of students, especially struggling readers, some of whom were my students, some of whom were kind of not quite my students, because I taught special ed, make a lot of progress between 3rd and 5th grade if they had the right instruction. And so to me, just sort of from my observation, 5th grade is where sort of some of the disparity starts to narrow. But I would certainly, if I were seriously writing this goal, I would try to get smarter on the research for that.
Yeah, so what this lifts up is a really important fact, is that the board is never listening for the vision and values in isolation, and is certainly never codifying them into a set of goals and guardrails in isolation. That at all times that you are being supported by your direct reports who are helping bring research, bring intel, bring the expertise to say, okay, you know what, that metric makes sense, but have you thought about this one? And really helping to massage to the point where what the board finally winds up with is a small set that get an awful lot done, that are really high leverage. Like you don't want to select because the idea is to have between 1 and 5. Why wouldn't the board adopt 20 goals? Why wouldn't the board adopt 20 goals? Why not?
Because then everybody's chasing after all the goals. You need to be unified.
So people are all going in different directions. They aren't unified, certainly. Any other thoughts? Why not have 20 goals? There's certainly more than 5 things that are important in the school system. So why would we limit it to no more than 5 goals?
Every goal takes a resource, time, people, and
Yeah, this is a resource allocation issue. Is that the more goals you have, the more dispersed your resources become, and you get to a point where one particular study indicates that boards that have between 1 and 3 goals are pretty likely to hit between 1 and 3 goals, and boards that have between 4 and 6 goals, any guess how many they're likely to accomplish?
1.
1 to 2. And goals that have between 7 and 11 goals, any guess how many in this study they were likely to accomplish?
0.
0. If you actually want to drive performance improvements for students, you can't be all over the place. You have to say, here's the vision of our community. We're setting this for a 5-year period, and we're going to march with intention and devotion toward this end zone on behalf of our children over the next 5 years. We're not going to get distracted. We're not going to get, chasing whatever the next shiny thing is. Like, we are going to be clear about what's the vision of the community, and we're going to chase it with intention and discipline over these next 5-year period. Yeah, Ramona?
So I think sometimes where people get lost is it's not in the detriment of dropping something else that's important. Just because you're concentrating on academics per se does not mean that all of a sudden you don't have enough buses to transport kids. I think it's an inclusive, it's not an and or, it's just that some things take more resources, more times, and require impact that again create student outcomes. So I think sometimes when there's a focus on, how can you only have 3 goals, or how can you only have 4 goals, and people may look at those 3 or 4, like for example, we used to have ELs, right? Executive limitations, that academics, life and work skills, citizenship, and I forget the other one. So people would say, well, how are you only doing those 3 things and not these other things? Mm-hmm. So it's intentful, measurable, just like you said, that are goals that have impact on student outcomes to ensure that they're ready, prepared to graduate. I think that's the difficult part to communicate.
Carolyn, what's on your mind?
Okay, I just want to take this opportunity to throw my goals out here, and I've been working on it. I don't even know if we offer such a course, but I wrote down being able to demonstrate financial literacy by 12th grade. And because I don't know if we even offer such courses, I'm just going to say there might be 10% of our students who can demonstrate that by 2020. And by June of 2025, I put down a goal of 85%.
Yeah, so the percentage of our graduates who have demonstrated financial literacy will increase from 20% in August of 2020 to 85% by August of 2025.
Correct.
Yeah, it sounds like a student outcome to me. It describes what students know or are able to do. Got it. Carol?
I think that there seems to be an element of SMART goals operating on 2 levels. That the goal itself has to be SMART, which is measurable, obtainable, specific, and all of those criteria. But also, to Dr. Dixon's point, and I think a couple of other people mentioned this, that certain goals are sort of the necessary, even if not sufficient objective to get to the next level. So I think they need to be SMART in terms of making sure that each goal sets the student up for success in the next level, and not even necessarily all academic, but whatever it is, they have to be intentional or thoughtful in terms of the overall objective.
Yeah, this is a real challenge for the board. Is that there's 7 of you. All 7 of you are elected to represent the vision and values of the community. But between the 7 of you, you're going to have to think through all of these issues and narrow it down to 1 to 5. And honestly, I recommend 3 goals that really describe what are the outcomes we're going to focus on most. And to Ramona's point, there's going to be 1,000 things that you don't have goals for. It doesn't mean they're not happening. It just means they're not the things that you are driving resources and driving change toward. This is about change management. And you can't change manage 100 different things at once. But you can reasonably, manage change around, 1 to 3 things at once, or at most, 5. But generally, I encourage boards, if you really want to see more improvement for students, then maybe consider fewer goals. The amount of jump that you should expect to see if you have 5 goals, if it looks like this, then the amount of jump you should expect to see if you only have 3 goals might look like this. The more goals you have, the more diffuse your resources. And so expect, a slightly less aggressive jump. If there are just 2 things that these are the things that we have to win at for the next 5 years to have the biggest blessing for the most of our children, then maybe just pick 2. But those are the types of things that the board's going to have to wrestle with. What are the highest leverage ones, and what's the fewest that we really want to lean into? Jennifer, and then I think Stan wanted to jump in. Oh, I'm sorry, James had your hand up, and then I think Stan wanted to jump in.
Some variation of, I had 2 that were some variation of what pretty much everyone has talked about. But the one I wanted to bring up, I think permeates through all of the other things. Percentage of students living in poverty is decreased by 10% by 2024. For me, one of the things that we go to almost by rote is to say that many of the challenges that we face in reading, in numeracy, in all of the other, workforce readiness, all of these things are created, and the root cause of them is poverty. And another thing that we always articulate is that we are going to need to strategically engage the broader community in solving many of the problems that our students face before they even get to our doors. And so if the board takes it upon itself to articulate that as a goal, it almost empowers us to hold the rest of the community accountable with us in achieving the goal. And the reason I think that that's important for me is because sometimes, we've created this culture where it's almost okay for us to flippantly talk about impoverished situations, right? Because we say, well, we've got, technically a 100% impoverished district. And so that allows us to feed, students, and it allows us to do other things, and it allows us to bring in other resources. And I agree with all of that. Yes, that's true. And we do need all of those resources. We do need to feed all of our students. All of those things are vitally, vitally important. But if we're not actively engaged in doing everything that we can to decrease poverty itself for our kids, then, the rest of it can, we'll always be talking about poverty as the obstacle for the majority of our students being able to succeed. And so we have to articulate that as a goal. We have to be empowered to advocate for our students with the mechanisms that we do already have in place. We've got a whole department now that's engaged in strategic partnerships with the broader community. We've invested a lot of resources into that, but we should be talking big goals where we're talking, big ideas and literally decreasing the poverty that exists, empowering our families to send students to us that are better equipped to do all of the things that we want to see academically. So that's something that I felt, like I needed to mention.
Got it. So absolutely not a goal. In that, it doesn't describe what students know or are able to do. So we talk about, diminishing poverty as a key lever to pull for improving student performance. The diminishing of poverty is actually an adult activity, not a student activity. And so to suggest that doesn't describe what we want students to know or be able to do. But it does sound like that may be a critical value that the board holds. That may be something that the board adopts as a guardrail. It says, on our way to accomplishing these, here's a value that must be honored as well. So let me nudge on this with you for a moment. So what's the policy change, or what is the value change that you want to see happen that the district would be doing?
I mean, there's quite a few things. I think it is.
Pick one.
I think it is a goal for students. I will push back on that a bit, because you don't typically just become an adult and get out of poverty, right? We need to be breaking our students of an impoverished mindset as they are growing.
Oh, it impacts students heavily.
So that's something that they don't know now, right? That how to live out of poverty, they don't know that right now. And so what we need to be teaching them is that here's how you don't live in poverty anymore. And it starts with their homes, it starts with their schools, it starts with the language we use with them, so that when they become adults, they can then go back and reteach that so that the cycle doesn't continue. See, we're breaking a cycle there. And so students, if students knew how to live out of poverty, they would. And so that's something that they don't know right now. So we've got to be actively engaged in making sure that they don't. So district policy is what you asked about, and how do we impact that? There's a couple of things for the board. Well, policy.
Pick one.
For me, policy means that we're using our spending power to empower local businesses to employ our parents.
You talk about your LEDE policy.
I'm talking about every dollar that we spend, we need to be making sure that it is circulating within our community, and make a strategic focus to make sure that the majority of the money that we're spending is being spent with entities that are hiring our parents. That's a board policy that we should be looking at. We should be
all right. So what I'm hearing is the vision that you're hearing in your community is we want to see outcomes for students improve. We want to see improvements in literacy and numeracy. And the value you're lifting up is that we have to apply our resources in a way that contributes to lifting our families out of poverty. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, sir. I think you've put it more succinctly than I could. I think yes.
And so I think a board could lean into this, but I'll offer an example. When I was board chair in Kansas City, one of the policies that I worked to advance was kind of this. I kind of thought of it as like a triple bottom line type policy. We said, you know what? Who I most want to spend my resources with is businesses that are your traditionally economically disadvantaged businesses. In your case, your locally economically disadvantaged enterprises, or minority and women owned businesses, things of that nature. I wanted to see us lead into working with families, frankly, that look like the families we serve. But I also wanted to lean into working with businesses who operationally were headquartered within the city as opposed to outside of it, because then more of their tax dollars, both property and sales, were directly landing in the city. But even more than that, I wanted to be doing business with businesses who were employing a great number of our families, or even owned by our families. Right. So when we pursued that when we looked at that as a guardrail, the work of the board was to say, our vision is we want to see improvements in student literacy and numeracy. But one of our values that needs to be protected along the way is, superintendent, you got to find a way to handle this triple bottom line, that to the extent possible, if it's only a 1, 2, 3, even maybe a 4% variance, I'd rather we be spending money with entities that meet all three of these criteria than with entities that don't. And so that could be a value, that could be a guardrail that the board lifts up and says, we've got to accomplish this vision, but all along the way, let's honor this set of community values. Let me check in with other folks. How are you resonating with this idea of this distinction between the vision, what we want students to know and be able to do, and the values, the behaviors, the guardrails, the behaviors that we want the district to honor on the way there? What questions or comments do you have about this relationship between the vision, which is about student outcomes, and that's where the goals come from, and the values, which is really about adult behavior, and that's where the guardrails come from? What questions or comments do you have about those two?
Can I just, so yes. It's not necessarily a question, but this is a prime opportunity for us to redefine who our students are. So when I listen to Board Member Ragland talk about getting families out of poverty, I then begin to think of adult education. And in that particular example, the adult becomes our student, and we provide job education, we provide GED attainment programs for them. So the student is then the adult, the parent, the family member. The input that we seek to give them as a district is the knowledge, the skills, the credentials, because that's what all, when we talk about income and people having opportunities to make more money, it's based upon your credential. And we need to be able to credential our parents so they can have opportunities to apply for these higher paying jobs. So the outcome, when I listen to Board Member Ragland, would be a goal that says 90% of the adults, but remember, these adults are our students because they're in our job education and GED attainment programs, complete our program and transition into jobs or careers earning 30% higher in income.
So you could have.
So we have to.
Let me repeat that back to you. Yeah, let me repeat that back to you. So what I heard was the board could choose to adopt a goal, and to your point, this is a goal focused on student outcomes. It's a broader view of students than K-12, but it is within the authority. The board can set whatever goal it wants to set for student outcomes. So what you're saying is the percent of our adult education participants who
90%,
who earn 30% or more after completing our course will increase from 15% today to 90%, by August 2025, something like that.
No, let me repeat that. 90% of the students completing our job training programs, our professional programs for adults, will earn an income of 30% higher. Now we have to put a time frame on that to say within 1 year or 2 years, understanding that in this job market, it may take a person, 1 to 2 years to get that good position. But I think as a board, if we take that as a responsibility, that it is our duty to ensure that any student is highly educated, then we have the opportunity to define who that student is.
We've got vision, we've got values, we've got goals, we've got guardrails. Other questions or comments?
Let me just address that for a moment. I don't disagree that those are highly desirable things to do, the adult education, just as it's highly desirable for us to educate our pre-K students. Yet that's not part of what we're charged with as a school district in terms of educating K-12. And our core mission has to be focused on K-12. And after we get that right, or provided we can get that right, we have the luxury of expanding and doing more. I agree completely. It'd be wonderful for the community, and it's important. So I'm not sure how far we can go.
Board Member Brown, can I just respectfully say
Hold on 1 moment. So the purpose of right now isn't to debate which one should we adopt,
right,
or the merits of them. The purpose is just we're getting clear about the mechanics of goals and guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
And so it won't. We are not going to debate or select or approve anything today. That's why I was very insistent about saying that earlier. That is not the purpose of our time. We're just getting fluent with this. And so in the in the spirit of fluency, I want to be clear, Eric. The board can choose to define students however it wants to define students, but that would involve the board defining that. And so if James turns out that there are 5 other people on this board besides James that think, you know what, our definition of students should include parents, and that is exactly what it will do. But that's an example of why it's important to have this conversation, is because between the 7 of you, if I press you to write it down, you all are going to come up with about 30 or 40 different potential goals and about 70 or 80 potential guardrails. The challenge is that unless you all can narrow that down to preferably about 3 of each, but definitely no more than 5 of each, the problem is if you don't narrow that down and then honor the product that you come up with, you are going to tear your district apart trying to chase a whole bunch of different stuff. And so just accept right now that none of you are going to get exactly what you want. That's just not how these things, it's called democracy. What will happen is you all will debate these things and really try to figure out what are it's not about your particular opinion of it as much as it's about, is this an authentic representation of the vision of our community? And when the majority of you believe it is, then it is. And if the majority of you don't believe it is, then it's not. That's how this will work. And so I just want to nudge back on you, Eric. I wouldn't encourage you all to take anything off the table as long as it is a student outcome. Then I think it's fair for brainstorming. But it's going to have to pass the crucible of the majority of you agreeing that this is one of the 3 most important things for us to focus on. And there's going to be a whole lot of stuff that doesn't meet that threshold, a whole lot of stuff. Ramona?
So sometimes I think, and I'm not particularly for this example, but do organizations sometimes actually have derailers because they concentrate on things that perhaps are not in our wheelhouse? And I think that's what Eric was trying to say.
So that is for you all to debate another day. That is not to debate today. The purpose of today isn't to decide which ones we're picking. We ain't picking none.
No, I wasn't. That's why I said I'm not technically going there. I'm just saying, like, when we're looking at these goals, I think what Eric was trying to say is, like, do we need to pay attention to ensure that we focus on Columbus City School K through 12 or adult ed impact, student outcomes?
So what is the case is that school systems only exist to improve student outcomes. But to James's point, the community has selected these 7 of you collectively to decide which students and which outcomes. Right. The only thing I can tell you is there's a specific framework for doing that that will better set you up for success than other frameworks. So I can walk you through the framework of it all, but only you all can decide what actually represents the vision of your community. And that's up for debate. And it sounds like it's going to be a great debate.
Yeah. So because I was leaning towards more of like, maybe my goal is too small. I had some of those other ones, but I was more of like, for me, looking at where we're at, yeah. I was thinking like 100% of our students will have a device with internet access.
So that's not a student outcome.
That and have logged in.
That's not a student outcome.
Times. Okay.
None of those describe what students know are able to do. Those describe the resources that adults are making available.
Gotcha.
The question isn't, can a kid log into a computer? The question is, can little AJ actually read or do math better tomorrow than I could yesterday? Or am I more capable as a result of earning an industry certificate tomorrow than I was yesterday? It's got to be about what is it that students know and are able to do.
Do we have an effective curriculum that's implementable?
That's not a student outcome.
No? Okay.
None of these things are student outcomes. These are all inputs. And this is important. You've got to constantly be reflecting on what are the inputs. But yeah, these are definitely inputs, not student outcomes. Yeah, Carol.
Um, two thoughts that are perhaps sobering and humbling at the same time. Well, one thought is or question, I guess. The tendency would be, I think, if we're limited to 3 goals, is to make them broad, big and audacious, like everybody graduates, or everybody's reading at grade level, or is there a tension or a rule of thumb about how to pick goals that are not too narrow, but not so broad as to be almost not helpful in terms of guiding your strategic decisions?
Yeah. So part of some of the tools that I'd work with your direct reports on is conducting a root cause analysis and some type of student needs assessment, some type of resource-based tools that are used to look into the data and try to identify where are the high leverage points.
Or the fault line, yeah.
Yeah. Some data analytics in collaboration with your direct reports is a necessary piece of this. And what I'll do after we finish up today is I'll send a document to your team. I'll probably send it over to Misty that outlines a lot of what the full strategic planning process will look like. And as part of that, you'll see a lot of the type of resources that the administration would need to provide for you all so that you're not shooting in the dark. Right now, you all are totally shooting in the dark based on what you've heard so far in the community, but not really based on a really deep dive analysis of current student performance. And so you'll need to add, you've already got a community vision understanding. You'll need to add to that what is currently true for my student data, and you'll take the community vision and the data and you'll blend those together to have a more holistic idea of how do we actually make this community vision happen in reality based on where our students are in the now.
Because it's a little scary if you're down to 3 goals. Like, what if you don't get the right ones?
Yeah. So this is the nature of leadership. It's about prioritization and recognizing that every time you set priorities, you are actively saying there are these 100 other things that we are not going to focus on, no matter how tempting it is to focus on them. And this comes back to what I said to Eric earlier. I don't know if you will want it enough. The adult behavior change that you will have to engage in to actually set your students up for success is you're going to have to be willing to let things go that are very much helping you be popular with people who put you where you are right now.
Well, even before you get there, although clearly you get there, we have to get enough knowledge or enough understanding to pick the right goals. And I think that comes from the data that we'll get from our
I wouldn't spend too much time there. That's going to lead you down a rabbit hole that will allow you to justify later on. Oh, well, I bet what happened is we just didn't pick the right goals. So let's go ahead and change to this one. And then 6 months later, oh, well, those weren't the right goals. No, the thing to do is do the work, trust the process, do the best that you possibly can and set the goals, and then have the discipline to follow them through for the 3 to 5 year period that you set them. There will be constant temptations seducing you away from the path of discipline and focus. Your task is to care more about your students than you care about your complications and distractions. And it will be hard. It will be hard.
Actually, that's what brings me to the second thought, because I keep hearing you saying, if you don't do this right, you will fail your students.
That's correct. That's what's at stake.
And I think that's a mantra that has to be kind of in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
Given. And to be honest, that's kind of what has gotten us here.
Yeah. The discipline part will be the biggest struggle. This is where I see boards fail. Everybody's got a vision. Everybody's got an idea. Everybody's got something that's important, something that's shiny. The reality is Those are paths that do not lead to the outcomes you want for your student. You have
Yeah.
to listen to the community, identify the community's vision, write it down, make it plain, and then follow it through. But changing course every 15 minutes because something shiny came along is the path to ruin on behalf of your children. To be clear, you will be more popular if you chase shiny things. Your likelihood of being reelected, of being liked and loved and adored, will increase to the extent that you indulge distraction. But as your popularity increases, your ability to achieve outcomes for your students will decline. You will have to make the choice that James looked it up. Will you choose yourself or will you choose your children? This is the question I asked Eric earlier. I don't know if you want it or not. If you actually want it as badly as you want, that's the test of serving on a school board, is you will find out. We'll be able to look at the data. We'll be able to look at how you spent your time in board meetings, and I can give you a absolutely objective data analytics understanding of, were you focused on student outcomes in your meetings or were you not? And that will let me know, no, they didn't want it badly enough. They wanted other things. Or yeah, these people were willing to sacrifice to make way for what's possible with children. We're about to wind this down. James, I saw your hand.
Yes, AJ, can you help us on the realizing the community's vision side? For me, I think where we have not done our best for our students leading up to now is making sure that we are accurately, consistently listening to what the community wants and then coming up with a program to do what they want.
Yeah.
And you know, what I'd like to hear from you is, what is the best way to approach that aspect of it? Because I think Carol alluded to it. You know, what if we pick the wrong goals? Well, we're not picking the wrong goals. We're not picking the goals. The community is. The community's telling us, here's what we want to see. And so, if we're really engaged, in listening to the community in an unbiased fashion, you know, that's a part of what I'd like to see. How do we get to the, and we've engaged in, and we've had a portrait of a graduate that we've already,
which I think is, to Ramona's point, is a step in the right direction already.
Right. We've done a lot of those things, but you know, regarding this process specifically, portrait of a graduate will help us. But are there other mechanisms that we can use?
Yeah. So generally speaking, I just received a message from the real boss, that would be Misty, indicating that this was actually scheduled for longer than I anticipated. I thought we were finishing in 5 minutes. And so I will actually be leaving in 5 minutes because I'm working with another board. And so what I'll do after this is I will type up a synopsis of a lot of our discussion, as well as a set of recommended next steps. And as quickly as you all want to proceed with next steps, I'm at your disposal. If you have already had enough of me, then I will gladly disappear. My dance card is always full, and so I'll understand if you need to go a different direction. But what I'll offer you is an outline that says, here is, and I'll put it in a project plan format. So it says, you know, here's what needs to happen on this day. Here's who owns it, so on and so forth, and just day by day, week by week by week, a project plan for what does it look like to go out and meaningfully engage with the community. I generally see two major types of activities the board engages in. I think of them as community outreach and community engagement. Community engagement is kind of the normal stuff. You host some meetings, people come, there you go. This is probably what you've already done. I think of community outreach is basically the exact opposite. Community is already having meetings, you take your show to them. And so I recommend a heavy dose of both of those. You got to take it to the people, you got to take it to the street. That wherever the people already are, that's where you need to go to engage in listening. If you are waiting for people to come to you, your listening of the vision will always be incomplete. You have to be willing to leave the area of comfort and power and authority that you sit on and go to where the people already are. Is there a parent meeting? Go there. Is there a bus stop where there's 50 people at? Go there. Is there a Rotary Club meeting? Go there. Is there a church basement, a neighborhood association? Go there. And I can give you coaching on what it looks like to do that and how to do that in an effective manner.
AJ, real quickly, can we make sure that that process, because during our portrait process, we engaged the community and what their hopes and dreams and aspirations
Yes.
were, trying to get to that. And there's going to be a next step where after everything is captured, then it is taking it back to kind of verify, did we get it right?
Yeah, so this is that. That's what I'm talking about.
Right, do a blending of that.
Yeah.
Board member. Okay, so I think that would be good for the board members kind of lead maybe in that piece just to make sure
that lines up perfectly.
Okay, thank you.
That lines up perfectly.
AJ, Dr. Dixon, just had a quick question and put it in the chat, but I don't think you saw it. Are we still doing student, teacher, and community or family surveys? We used to do that once a year where we had, I mean, there were like 25 questions, which there used to be like 75 questions, and we shortened it to 25 questions where we would get feedback from students, teachers, parents, and I think maybe some community members. We used to analyze that data in the Public Engagement Committee a while ago. I was just wondering if, and you don't have to answer today if you don't know that, but just wondering if there's always been very good feedback on those. There were some very good questions. There was a committee of about 30, 35 community members that went through that and just really try to make sure that we're asking the correct questions. Just wondered, even if we had, and I know opinions change every year because we got new parents every year, we got new students every year, but there was a lot of really good data in some of that stuff. And if we are doing it, and if we have already done it, maybe folding some of that data in. And I think we used to, because they were paper, we used to get even up to about 15% return, which I thought was pretty good. So not a question, you don't have to answer it today, but just wondering.
All right, well, my time with you is up, and so I'll hand it back to the board chair. But again, what I will do is I will type up a follow-up memo based on this session and that identifies potential next steps and that gives you all opportunity to decide, is this a journey that makes sense to you? And if so, if you want any support from me along it. I have thoroughly enjoyed this session and I'm excited about the success you all will have on behalf of your students. Madam President, back to you.
Thank you so much, AJ, and we very much appreciate you spending this time with us. I do believe all of us found great value in having you as part of this discussion and want, to work with us going further. I do want to thank the board members for being open and honest today. It is hard being elected officials and being vulnerable and transparent, and I think each of us strive for that. And we strive every day to keep our students first. And that's, I think, what we demonstrated today. We have a lot of hard work to do and to go forward. And I know each and every one of you is committed to this. So AJ, you definitely be reaching out and scheduling a follow-up very soon.
Be blessed.
Thank you. So on that note, board members, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Cole,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mr. Ragland,
Yes.
Vice President Reyes,
Thank you, colleagues. Yes.
President Adair.
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Night.